All right. Check. Check's good. Taking it from the top. Tippy. It's 40 Ounce Hemlock Podcast, episode 46. I'll be right with you. Take a sip of my coffee. I'm coming. Gotta eat my clementines too. It's beautiful, isn't it? Just wait. There's a reason I'm doing this. War going on outside, no man is safe from. There's a war going on outside, no man is safe from. All right. Are we good? Are we good? Anyways, that's the show for the day. We're done. I'm just kidding. It's 40 Ounce Hemlock Podcast. We're back at 6 in the morning. My name is Nick. And as you probably know, if you're listening, if you haven't been listening, then you're probably not listening now. So I probably don't need to say that. Welcome to the show, episode 46. I was moved to do this show this morning because I got a little distracted and diverted in my morning routine, as is my wont. By the way, I'm not going to apologize for episode 45. New rules. Look, man, I'm what I am. All right. I'm going through it, as they say. And there's a lot I want to do with this show. And I always come to this crux, to this fork in the road where it's like, but I'm facing all this stuff in my life right now. And how do I block that out and do what I want to do with this? And I sat down the other morning for episode 45, and I realized I was going to deviate radically from the purpose of this show. But I had to just talk, okay? Not a lot of folks to talk to right now about some of the deepest things. So you got an earful. Under the clever guise of a little spiel about the MyPillow guy, you know, is what it is. But I woke up at 3 a.m. this morning, as is my wont, and I dutifully got the pot of coffee made, as is my wont, and I sat down to work on, well, now JavaScript. It's usually Java, as is my wont. During this interesting time in my own life and yours, probably towards the tail end of it. I'm in Wisconsin. I don't know where you are. The fog seems to be lifting. The lockdown seems to be lifting. I'm going to be turning 42 here in a minute. Stupid governor of this city can't take this lockdown past my birthday. Law says. So, by the way, same guy that cuts my hair, you know, when we're not in a quarantine, cuts the governor's hair. I can't wait to ask this guy, my friend, my confidant, my consigliere, Giorgio. I can't wait to ask this guy if he's been cutting the governor's hair during the lockdown. It'd be interesting, wouldn't it? Because you can't really social distance in a barber's chair. So if you're enforcing rules on others that you're not following yourself, well, I told you, there's a war going on outside. No man is safe from. I'm going to stop with the clementines now. I apologize. So why, if I was working on JavaScript at 3 in the morning on the couch, and if you're wondering about that, maybe listen to the previous episode, or don't, because I did a lot of crying. Life's tough, man. It's tough for me. I know it is for you. And I've just sort of made this resolution, since only a select group of friends listen to this show anyways. Why not just be who I am, right? And that's what I'm going through. So there it is. I was moved to do this show because I got a little distracted as I was working on programming. Trying to save myself and my family, my son. A little career change. A little reinvent yourself. It's all right. I'll do it. I'm a different breed. This is what I'm learning about myself. I'm a different breed. And you can be a different breed too. In fact, the show today is largely about different breeds. And the realization of the existence of different breeds. And of course, here I mean breeds in a different sense. But you'll see what I mean in a minute. The other day, a gentleman who played a pretty significant role in a pretty significant and particular point in my life passed away. I didn't know him personally. I knew of him, followed him quite a bit at one point. Not so much lately, but at one point. Ravi Zacharias. Sorry, I'm going to quit leaning on this card table. I'm at a makeshift desk. Hey, if any of you have any last minute gift ideas, Clark W. Griswold. In addition to the MyPillow. Take a desk. Man, hang on a second. I'll fix my hood. So when I went to go study philosophy, hear all about this in episode 1 of this podcast way back in the day. A couple years ago I did this, right? It was at a time in my life when I had really had a turnaround. And in some ways it was drastic, and in some ways it was gradual. But it was drastic in the sense that the direction which it ultimately led was antithetical to the direction in which it was previously headed. Okay? Now, that's not to say there hasn't been a lot of screeching tires and, right, bumping into odds in it, right? But different worlds, different breeds. I was living in a flat on the northwest side of Chicago, doing my undergraduate. I had returned to my undergraduate study and studying philosophy at a small university in Chicago. Oh, you're going to hear me wince now and then. I apologize. I got a knife in my shoulder, not literally, but I'm sleeping on this couch and I got a knife in my shoulder again. I think it's kind of a running thing with me. God. Living in a flat on the northwest side of Chicago, studying philosophy. What prompted me to study philosophy? I'm not going to rehash episode 1 of the 40 Ounce Hemlock podcast here, but what prompted me to study philosophy was that I had been pretty sure of myself as a young man, what I now know to be a naive, silly young man. Now I'm a naive, silly old man. I had been pretty sure of my political and moral persuasions, which were effectually collectivist and socialist in nature. And then one thing led to another, and I started studying philosophy, and I read some things that caused me to pause and reevaluate. Thank God. Some people can read the things that I read and not pause and not reevaluate. And that has always perplexed me. And I know that it perplexes some other people. And that perplexion, is that a word? That state of perplexity, there we go. That state of perplexity is really the theme of this show. Because if you're perplexed by that, then you won't understand that there is a war going on outside that no man is safe from. See what I did with it? All right. And I didn't understand that at the time. I read some things in philosophy, in theology, various sorts of theory that caused me to look at myself and my own thinking and say, eesh. All right. I ran with crowds alone, but I ran with crowds at that time that could best be captured these days as the groups that were highlighted in my series called Unmasking Antifa. All right. Episodes 21 through 35 of this podcast. You know, the MoveOn.org folks, the Occupy Wall Street folks, the Black Lives Matter folks. I was that kid. I'm ashamed to say. And yet not, because you know what? Like Aslan says to what's her face in The Horse and His Boy, I tell no one any story but their own. Well, this is my story. All right. But I was moved to re-examine my beliefs by some things that I read. And I know now that the things that I read at that time have moved other people to re-examine their beliefs, and that they have not moved other people to re-examine their beliefs, right? And that perplexes some people. And again, I know I'm rehashing here, but just bear with me because we're going to go somewhere here. Ravi Zacharias passed away the other day. I think he was 73, 74. Ravi Zacharias ran with the different crowd than me. Ran with the Billy Graham crowd, the evangelical itinerant preacher, stadium preaching, come to Christ crowd. I'm speaking matter-of-factly. I'm not speaking disparagingly. Okay? But with a distinctly intellectual spin. Ravi Zacharias was someone who had read some of the things that I had read. Many of the things, probably more things than I read, right? And was moved in the same way by them that I was moved. And then went to study philosophy like I did because he was so moved by those things and what those things could be harnessed and utilized to show and elucidate in discussions of faith and religion and life and morality and all of it, right? And so Ravi Zacharias was an evangelist, but what you might call an intellectual evangelist, all right? And he spent a good deal of his life, God bless him, away from his family, in front of hostile audiences often, clashing swords with folks like one of whom we're gonna talk about this morning. One particular gentleman. It's a stretch to call him a gentleman. I don't think he's a gentleman. I think he's a beast. But he postures as a gentleman. They all pretend to be gentlemen. But their hearts are different. All right. And it was this quote unquote gentleman and some comments that he made and some sitting and scratching my beard and thinking about those comments while I should have been working on JavaScript that caused me to come down here and push record this morning. I went away to undergrad or back to undergrad to study philosophy because I became one of these Christians. Well, I became a Christian, or I re-became a Christian. I don't know, whatever you want. I'm not here to like diagram my narrative. That's not the point here. The point is to fixate on a very particular and important part of it that a lot of folks are either in the midst of or will be soon. We're going to hear from one. We're going to hear from one in a moment. I was one of these guys, and this is why I bring Ravi into this, not just because he passed away and is with the Lord in glory now, which is wonderful. It's sad to see him go. It's sad for his family, but as Christians, we're supposed to rejoice. And the Lord gave that guy a lot of years. He, if you listen to his narrative, his story, he might have gone sooner. He tried to kill himself when he was a young man, became disillusioned with life, drank poison. Now you see why I bring him in here? It's 40-ounce hemlock. Hemlock is a poison. It's what Socrates drank when he didn't want to go along with the crowd, so to speak. I mean, it's more than that. I'm not going to get into it here. We'll explain the show title somewhere else. He drank poison as a young man, tried to kill himself, but survived it, and then lived to the ripe old age. I think 73, 74 is a ripe old age if you drink poison as an 18-year-old or whatever. I really don't mean to say that lightly. I wish he could have been 94, but he was 74 or something like that. Cancer, maybe related, maybe not. I don't know. But Ravi was one of these Christian intellectuals who is, or seemed to be, of the mind, no pun intended, of the persuasion that what's needed is simply evidence when dealing with a person who is not convinced of the truth of Christ's claims regarding himself in Scripture. Okay? What's needed is simply evidence. Now you might think, well, what else could be needed? Like some music? No. Hold on. I'm doing the show different these days. I'm just talking here, man. I don't got time. I used to sit and oh my God. No, we're going to get to this. I think it's important, but just bear with me here. He's one of these Christian intellectuals who believes that what's needed is simply evidence. When I first sat down and read my first, essentially philosophical treatise by C.S. Lewis, I was so compelled by it. That I then went to study philosophy and got 2 master's degrees and took out a bunch of student loans. And now myself and my family are suffering under the crushing debt of all that. Hence the 3 o'clock in the morning on the couch studying JavaScript. I said I wasn't going to have any more clementines. I just had another clementine. But I was like Ravi, one of these folks who thought, and I'm not, good Lord, please hear me, I'm not diminishing Ravi Zacharias or his tact or his anything like that. I'm just describing a mindset, just describing a general outlook. I know that there were friends that I handed that book to and was like, dude, you got to fucking read this, man. And it did not move them. And I was like, what? What? And I couldn't process that. Okay? Because the arguments were so compelling. And the positive arguments and the negative arguments, like the defeating arguments of my previously held beliefs, were so penetrating and so exposing that it was really hard to process when another pair of eyes, attached to another brain, attached to another mind, paging Rene Descartes, would look at those same arguments and go, huh. I was like, what are you I handed that book to one of my best friends and was like, just sat in my flat, he was in New York at the time, I think, like waiting for the call, like waiting for the phone call, like to hear, yo, man, I read that book. I'll never be the same. Cause my sister handed me that book. And I had to, at some point, come to her and be like, I'll never be the same. But some people remain the same. even in the face of what to other people seems extraordinarily compelling argumentation. Precise, acute argumentation. Nuanced argumentation. And some people see it and they hear it and they go, whatevs. You know? And that is, for someone who's in the midst of all this and sorting through it and being moved by it, that's perplexing. It's especially perplexing if you begin from this general outlook that thinks that all people need is evidence. Now, what you'll notice about that assumption is that it contains another assumption. Or there's a flip side to the coin of that assumption. You can say it however you like. The idea that all people need is evidence, all right, is really just another way of saying that their problem with the idea of the reality of God is merely intellectual. They might say, well, what other kind of problem could it be? Yeah, you're in the grip of it if you don't. Look, it's moral. Like Aldous Huxley said, and Ravi loved this quote. Aldous Huxley said, I don't want there to be that God. I don't want the world to be like that. And who else said that more recently? Thomas Nagel from NYU, one of my favorite philosophers. I don't want the world to be like that. I don't want it. All right. But Ravi was one of these Christians like myself who read this stuff and was like, man, people got to hear this. And he made a career out of propagating that stuff. And he did an amazing job at it. He was an amazing speaker, amazing communicator, passionate, kind, gentle, funny, gregarious, and knew how to package his message. It was really great. But my point here is that he had this general outlook that what people need is just evidence. And if they saw compelling enough evidence, they'd change their mind, which again is another way to say that their hearts, their souls, as the philosophers would say, that the seat of their morality is fine. Either way. It doesn't have a dog in the fight. It doesn't have a stake in the matter. So, if it turns out that God exists, well, just give me the evidence, and if it leads me that way, I'll follow it, and there you go. All right. I went through a sort of second transformation or mutation. These folks love to talk about mutations. I'll put in there too. I went through a second sort of random mutation in my undergraduate years, where after being so compelled by the sort of philosophical underpinnings of all this stuff, I started to get really perplexed by this phenomenon where it was so compelling to some folks and not to others, right? And I really started to take on a different view. And again, I don't mean to make this all autobiographical, but I'm just trying to lead into something here. I came to have some different views about that. I came to have some different views about the whole game that was being played. Like, philosophers love to talk about the proofs for God's existence, and all those discussions of the evidence and all that all take place in a context of a larger discussion about, can it be proved? And if it can be proved, should you believe it? And if it can't be proved, should you still maybe believe it? Right? The whole idea that it's this thing that needs to be established, that other things are known well enough that they can then serve as premises for this other thing that is as yet unknown. But once it's established by those premises, well, then there's some moral and intellectual compulsion to believe it. And if you do, stand up and someone will come to you and pray with you. I am not disparaging the ministry. I'm just like I said, I'm just talking here. I'm kind of just winging it. I just want you to see that there is this way of looking at all this that believes that we're all sort of in this neutral place. We're all sort of together in this thing, and some of us have looked at more of the evidence than others. And for those who have, I'm talking about Christians now, have this way of looking at things. And with respect to the others in the world that they're trying to reach, for those of us that have looked at more of it, it's just a matter of sharing that evidence. Just share the evidence. Read this book by Lee Strobel. And I'm not, I got to be careful here, man. I know I can have this this tone that sounds flip. I'm not, these guys, they're monsters. They're giants. Lee Strobel's a giant. Ravi Zacharias was a giant. But a lot of us just, we pass that book to a friend, or we have this discussion, or we come to this conclusion we reach this point of argumentation with a friend. We're like, well, why aren't you moved by it? Don't you see? Right? There's never been an instance of a mutation that increased genetic information. Don't you see? There's not a shred of evidence of it. Don't you see? Well, in a way they do, and in a way they don't. And I, in my own life, had this sort of second, what do we call Americans, the second great awakening? I had this sort of second great awakening where it was like, there's something else going on here. And an interesting, I think there's something else going on here with unbelief. I mentioned C.S. Lewis a minute ago. There is this other passage in one of the other books in that Chronicles of Narnia series. And this is a good thing to dwell on for a moment, right? Because Ravi loved to use Lewis's arguments and Lewis's fiction. Lewis is a giant. If Ravi and Lee Strobel are giants, well, what's Lewis? Lewis is like a demigod. you know what I mean? There's this other passage, I think. In fact, I think it's either in The Magician's Nephew or The Horse and His Boy, where Lucy, I think, is talking to Edmund, and she has like this moment. They're talking about the Narnian animals. If you haven't read the books, this is gonna make no sense. So I'm not gonna dwell on it too long. But she just has this moment of realization. She has this awakening, where she's like realizes that animals, as she has understood them her whole life, were not animals as such. They were animals in an altered state. They were what Lewis in that series, in that fictional setting, calls, like dumb animals. They had no intellect. They couldn't talk and communicate. And see, Narnian animals are more like humans. They have personhood. And Lucy, once she has this realization that there's this bifurcation, there is this line drawn down through the world of animals where she had previously supposed only one kind of animal existed, and they were all just like the horse in your stable in the backyard. All right? Those are the dumb animals. The Narnian animals, which according to Lucy's allegory are like the reborn animal, I'm going to get too into theology here, right? But those are the real animals. And then Lucy has this moment where she goes, oh, shit. And what? Well, she doesn't say that, right? What's the moment she's having? She looks at them and she's like, I keep rereading these books with my kids, but I'm not up to this point again. I think it's Edmund that she's talking to. She's like, Ed, what if it's like this with people too? Heretofore, I've just been supposing that we are all this one kind of thing. I think elsewhere in the podcast I've called this attitude, some people just take it as a granted, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. The one worlders. What if we're all just one? So we're all on the same page. We're all just existent in the same circle of the Venn diagram. We're all looking at the same facts. We're all considering the same evidence. It's just that some of us have considered it more than others. And we're all sort of starting from the basic moral starting point, and the only question is intellectual. She doesn't say all this. She says to Edmund, what if what we've just discovered about the animals is true of men too? And what she means is, and what she goes on to elaborate and elucidate is, what if some people are actually just beasts? What if there's Narnian people and non-Narnian people? All right? Just like there's Narnian animals and non-Narnian animals. It's a profound moment for her. It was a profound moment for me. I was listening to a podcast from a gentleman that I like and respect very much the other day, and he had this same profound moment in the midst of his podcast when discussing some of the recent news and cultural issues surrounding what we're all facing right now with this pandemic. I'm having another Clementine. All right. He had a moment where he's discovering that we might not all be Narnians. Or said another way, there is a Narnian kind of person and a non-Narnian kind of person. All right? And this is interesting, and I bring it in here, and I'm going to play him, because he too is a Christian. And he too was not one before. And he too was moved, by his own account, incidentally, by a book by Lee Strobel. Okay? So in other words, what am I doing here? See what I mean? His own narrative suggested to him that it's just a matter of the evidence. And so, someone in his life, I think it was a fellow this guy used to be a member of the Secret Service under several presidents, Bush and Obama. Oops, I wasn't supposed to say Obama's name. I never say his name. Whatever his name is. Right? And somebody passed him this book, he said, and he read it and was like, well, he read it, and like Lucy, our fictional account of Lucy just now, he was like, oh, shit, I'm in trouble. Because I'm not what I thought I was. I'm not good enough for God. Because God is righteous, and I'm not. And I got a problem. And thanks be to God, Christ is the solution to that problem. I see it now. I see it now. All right? I'm going to play you. You might think, what does this have to do with the pandemic? Nick, just listen, all right? I might fail here. We might get to the end of the show and be like, I don't see what you're doing here, dude. But I think you're starting to see it, and I think you'll see it more. I'm going to play you a clip from this gentleman's podcast, kind of an extended clip, because we're going to see him sort of go through this sort of a meltdown, to be honest with you, at the sheer insanity, the sheer beastliness of the folks he is discussing in the context of the social and political reaction and dealing with of this pandemic. All right. And then I'm going to bring it back to the article that I happened upon when sitting on the couch, and I should have been working on JavaScript this morning, by a gentleman who I have in a previous podcast and here called a beast as well. I think this is awfully caustic, Nick. Yeah, you'll see. Yeah, it's okay to say it. I was a beast too. If not for Christ, I'm a beast. All right? It's okay to say it. But I'm no longer one of these folks who believes that we all start on the same page and that everyone has the same general intent and goodwill and outcomes in mind, just different paths of we all just need to like get together on the data. No. Beasts don't care about data. They hate God. And as we've said elsewhere, particularly in the Unmasking Antifa series, they hate what God loves. So they seek to deface it and distort it and destroy it. Unmasking Antifa, tear it down, tear it down, tear it down, anywhere it appears. All right? So the context of this podcast, and I'm going to play you a rather extended clip from, is this gentleman, this former Secret Service member, who I think is like the next big thing in conservative podcasting. It's not me. I think this guy is like the era. I mean, you're going to hear a side of him right now that he would tell you is not his best look, you know. And his wife, I think after this show, his wife is his producer, was like kind of not a sidekick, but does a lot of like his tech on the side. I think he came back in the next day. I was like, I know, sort of lit into everybody. He's like, but I'm fired up here. He's going to tell you this is not his best look, but I think it's a really revelatory look, because you're seeing this man go, hold on a second. We're dealing with beasts here. Like, gloves off. New rules. All right? Because it's not just a matter of the evidence. We all don't have the same. These people are willing to inflict and to facilitate and inflict and observe death and destruction of their neighbors because of their hatred of this president. And what have I told you in our first series, From Darwin to Donald Trump? It's not a hatred of him. It's a hatred of you. And if you want to get a little bit theologically deeper, it's not really a hatred of you. It's a hatred of what's right and good. And it's a hatred of what's right and good because they're beasts. And they're beasts because we're all beasts, but for Christ. Okay? You might think, that's a lot of leaps, Nick. Yeah, it's my show. It's my show. I'm going to play you this, and we'll come back, and I'm going to discuss this article by this guy, this beast from Harvard named Steven Pinker, who I discussed at some length in From Darwin to Donald Trump, episodes 1 through 10 of this podcast. So here's a clip from the Dan Bongino show on my podcast, playing somebody else's podcast. I'm gonna play you a real podcast on my podcast. Okay, this guy's fantastic. Again, the context here. Let me just give you the context. The context here is about evidence and how we treat evidence. Because there's evidence about New York's response to the pandemic. And there's evidence about Florida's response to the pandemic. And there's evidence that suggests that Florida's response to the pandemic was much better than New York's response to the pandemic and resulted in less suffering and less death and less spread. Okay? And the moment that this guy has is seeing what was done by the media with this evidence. See, we said at the beginning of the show, isn't it just a matter of just getting the evidence, seeing it, and then following it? No. We don't like where the evidence leads. So then what do you do with it? Well, we twist it and distort it. Why? Because we're beasts. Okay? This was a realization that I had about philosophy in general, and especially about being a a non-believer or a whatever you want to call it, or a backslidden, I don't know what you want to call it, but being a non-believer turned believer who originally thought, well, now it's just a matter of just get the evidence out there. It's not a matter of just getting the data out there. It's not data that's needed. All right? It's a change of heart. It's a surgical procedure, as they say, by the great physician. All right? I'm going to play you this clip. I think it'll be pretty self-explanatory when I play it, and it's somewhat extended, and we'll come back right after it, okay? So this is a clip from, I think, Wednesday or Thursday's Dan Bongino show. All right? It's good. It's really good because you're hearing a guy go through it here. You hear enough of me going through it. You're going to hear a guy go through it here. And he's pretty lit up. He's pretty lit, as the kids say, right? But if you're not paying attention.
Why are you reading this? So, what is Ron DeSantis talking about? Let me give you the media.
Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida, and you just played a clip where Ron DeSantis just dismantled any notion that what was being purported in the media about the Florida statistics were inaccurate or, right? He's defending the decisions and the policy that Florida has enacted, which have resulted in the data that suggests that the handling of the pandemic has been markedly better in Florida than elsewhere, namely New York. And there was this interview that he just finished playing with Ron DeSantis where Ron DeSantis just dismantles the naysayers, just dismantles them. All right. And Bongino here, Mr. Bongino, Dan Bongino, is coming to a point where he's not, he's very big on telling folks, just don't even listen to these people. Just don't watch the news. Just they're lying to you. They're beasts. All right. CNN, MSNBC, NBC, ABC, CBS, they're beasts. They are filled with ire and hatred. They're ideologues. If you want to understand what an ideologue is, listen to episode 21 through 35 of this podcast. then come back. Right? And he pays very close attention to listener feedback. And he's like, someone was like, no, you should watch them so you can be critical of them. You should watch them so you can understand what they're saying and interact with them. And he's like, no. These people are not worth engaging. They are not dealing in good faith. They are not on there. See, he's realizing it's not just a matter of the evidence. You're going to see this. Just watch.
A narrative for, again, the total fiction that the emailer who sent me the email, and I'm not knocking you, I appreciate your feedback, said you should read and learn to be critical. Don't read it. It's made up. The fictional narrative was this. Florida, with a Republican governor, which has unbelievably outperformed New York in the response to the Wuhan virus. The data's low and the deaths are low because the data's manipulated. And all of a sudden they found a story, and the story was this. A scientist at Florida's data entry location where they were putting in data on the Wuhan virus. A scientist there was fired because the scientist was being asked to manipulate the data, and like a hero, like Joan of Arc, Joan of Arc, stood up, shield in hand, fought against the tyrannical Ron DeSantis, and refused to manipulate this data and was subsequently fired. Of course, again, the emailer who wants you to read this, people read this and went, it was all over. Look at Twitter where the liberal morons dominate everywhere. Just read their responses to DeSantis and his thing yesterday. Your data was manipulated. The story already set in. What, I hurt your ears there? Paul is, you laughing? The data was manipulated. That's it. It's all over Twitter. The narrative was already set. The concrete was poured by the media, and liberals are so stupid because they read this stuff. They believed it without ever looking at the story. You got the story now? The only reason DeSantis did better, the Republican, a lot better than New York, is because they manipulated the data, and they're probably hiding a bunch of dead bodies somewhere. Then, of course, if you applied the Bongino rule, which is why I didn't cover this yesterday. Oh, wait. always give it 24 hours. How many times do I have to tell you this? The Bongino rule. Anytime you read an anti-Trump, anti-Republican story in the media, give it 24 hours. There is a 75.26% chance the story is totally, completely made up. So was this person who was fired because Joan of Arc stood up to this and refused to manipulate the Florida data? Were they really fired because of that? Joe, I'll ask you an even simpler question. Media reported it was some scientist, Linus Pauling, like scientist. I mean, someone really important. This is a very, were they even a scientist?
I told you this is going to be an extended clip. Just stay with it, okay? And don't be put off by his tone and his excitement and his passion. We are talking about life and death. You constantly have to keep that in view. We are talking about, elsewhere in the show, previous episodes, I've probably said ideas that have life and death consequences. Now we're dealing with the life and death itself. So don't be put off by passionate people. Perhaps ask yourself why you are not passionate.
Well, let's just go by the local reporting because I don't know this woman and I don't want to impugn her character. We're just going to cover the actual reporting. Oh, now we find out this is the local news, WEAR TV, Where TV. DeSantis, the Florida COVID-19 dashboard designer. I thought it was a scientist. I thought leave that out. I thought that was now all of a sudden it's just someone involved with data entry. Oh, this is fascinating. A dashboard designer, Florida COVID-19 dashboard designer faces cyber sexual harassment charges. We didn't hear about that, Joe. I'm just covering the reporting, folks. I thought she was Joan of Arc. She was a scientist standing up in the face of mass Republican tyranny and the media. These colossal dipwads. People believe this. Liberals are so stupid. They believe this. Dan, you can't say that. We're not going to convince the liberals. Ladies and gents, thank you. I'm not interested anymore. This country is...
I'm not interested anymore. You have to appreciate the moment that this man is having, and it's part of an extended moment that he has had that forms a lot of the backbone of his show, especially since the election of Trump. Sort of this new rules mentality, like gloves are off mentality. But you have to understand why they're off. All right? Stay with this.
At war. Do you understand that?
We are at war. There is a war going on outside no man is safe from.
We are at war right now. And yes, I'm using that analogy intentionally because the republic is falling apart because the truth, we are at war for the truth. And you're being told by people with power, pens, websites, and mass audiences a series of lies, which is incentivizing people to act in ways antithetical to the existence of this country. I am not kidding. We are in an existential fight here if we allow this to continue. The media is lying to people on a daily basis to get them to do things antithetical to the existence of this country and the prosperity and very existence of your family. You doubt me? Why do they want these lockdowns to continue?
Because they're beasts.
Why do they want you to stay out of Florida and praise Andrew Cuomo from New York?
Because they're beasts.
Because they hate this president, and they hate freedom and liberty, and they
hate you.
They hate the conservative movement. They will do anything, including incentivizing you to succumb to a lockdown that will destroy your business and your family and potentially this country. They do it because they simply hate our party. There is no other explanation.
Now, hate, let's bring it back. I'm going to keep going with this in a second, but let's bring it back to what I said towards the beginning about this revelation, this moment, this realization, this awakening, where heretofore you think, oh, it's just a matter of data. It's just a matter of evidence. Those are intellectual categories. Hate is not an intellectual category. The Bible calls it enmity. That's not an intellectual category. That's a moral category. The problem is moral. Okay? It's not intellectual. Somebody hates you. If somebody is at war with you, you don't take data to a war. All right? You see?
You need further evidence? This is an NBC reporter. I'm going to show this tweet in a second. Carl Quintanilla, who I don't know, but he's got a pretty big, I know who he is from television, but I don't know him personally. He dared put up a tweet yesterday indicating that these lockdowns may not only not be working to quell the virus, but may be making it worse. This is an NBC reporter.
Uh-oh.
Not Bongino.com, not Fox, not someone who does fair and balanced news. This is an NBC reporter. If you doubt me, go look up his Twitter profile and look at the responses from the liberals who are horrified that an NBC reporter dared to tell you the truth. They're upset about it, including other reporters and academics. Look at his tweet. At Carl Quintanilla. JP Morgan has a devastating piece arguing that infection rates have declined, not increased in states where lockdowns have ended. Quote, even after allowing for an appropriate measurement lag. Wait, am I reading that right?
Yeah.
I'm not. There's the. Why are you holding out? You don't want to. The audience.
Why were they outraged at this NBC reporter who said this? Is it clear now? It should be becoming clear, especially if you've listened to previous series of this show. It's not a matter of the data. They have an outcome that they prefer, a social and political outcome or reality that they prefer. The pandemic, as such, is merely a tool for expediting that outcome. I've said earlier in this show, they don't just hate Trump, they hate you. They don't just hate you, they hate what's right and good. They don't just hate what's right and good, they hate what's right and good because they hate the author of rightness and goodness. In the series, episodes 21 through 35, Unmasking Antifa, we said they hate any evidence of a structure or order or natural order to things. They hate the idea that anything has a nature and therefore has an oughtness and therefore has rules. Because they have a bent of mind, incidentally, that can only be unbent by Christ. They have a bent of mind. And where they want to go with this world is as far away from this world's maker as they can get. And so in every endeavor, they blaze new paths in those opposing direction, in that opposite direction. So if God made man to be free, they want man a slave. If God made the family, they want to destroy the family. If God is the author of virtuous and good and beautiful sex and reproduction and life, they want perversion and abortion. Do you see? They want to deface what is good because they hate the author of goodness. The pandemic is just a means towards quickly getting the kind of society they desire, which is a society where men are controlled and owned by other men, where the masses, as they call them, their lives are run and determined by a select group of know-it-alls, where we are slaves. The pandemic is just a means towards that end. Okay? So when an NBC reporter breaks from the herd, no pun intended, and he says, actually, this isn't working and was maybe a bad idea, they go apoplectic. They go ballistic. Why? Because it's not, see a nice little graph here with data points and deviation and all that good stuff. They don't care about the data. They care about getting as far away from the world that God designed as they can get in every endeavor, in every domain, in every pursuit. They are, in their hearts, beasts. Okay? So when someone like this Carl Quintanilla, whatever his name is, has a little moment, he's like, hey, if we're just looking at the evidence, they go, whoa, 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 whoa. We're not just looking at the evidence. This isn't about evidence, dude. We are trying to remake, like our previous president, we are trying to remake this society. And it turns out that destroying everyone's lives and livelihoods and crushing the economy so everybody becomes dependent on a government that can't support them save but printing fake money. Turns out that's a really good way to get there. So shut the up, Carl. They're beasts. You got to have a little Lucy moment here. You got to see it. You got to be done with people who want to go to church on Sunday and not see the ramifications of what they say they believe in the world all around them and address it as such.
Paula's not putting me on the screen because she doesn't want to see the melt. She doesn't want you to see me losing my mind right now because I'm so pissed off this morning about the BS that you're being surrounded with and forced to drink from a sewage fire hose by these idiots. Finally, you get a guy who tells the truth on his Twitter account, an NBC guy. And ladies and gentlemen, just read the responses. Liberals are apoplectic. You're apoplectic that as the lockdowns, which have destroyed people's lives, have ended, infections have gone down. So what are you arguing for? More economic destruction and more deaths? That's your campaign slogan? Liberals 2020, more destruction, more deaths, more destruction, more deaths. This is your campaign slogan?
He sounds like he's being jocular.
Joey Donuts for governor. More destruction.
Sounds like he's being punchy, but you have to hear what he's going through it. And it has a little bit of punch to it, but there's you can tell Dan is going through it. He's like, really, this is what we're dealing with? That's what these people want. Well, then what? I'm done. I'm done being nice.
More death. What are you arguing for? You're upset at a study showing these lockdowns have done nothing? Matter of fact, where they've lifted the lockdowns, infections have gone down, and you're mad? What kind of a psycho-sociopath blanker are you?
You're a beast.
Are you insane? I'm not kidding. Are you nuts? Do you have are you a serial killer? What is wrong with you?
See, he doesn't know where else to go.
Do you have kids? You want your kids to go out and be bankrupted and to potentially die from a disease? To what? To prove Trump wrong?
See. I don't know if you're watching my video here. You might just be listening on audio. He's kind of, he's not sure where else to go with this. Like, this is what it's come to? I mean, and you're going to hear, he's having a moment. He's going to hear, let's play. He's going to finalize the moment. He's going to say, I think he's going to say something like, I used to think that there could be some, you ready? Some middle ground. All right. That's essentially what he's going to, if I recall this clip correctly, that's essentially what he's going to say. Look,
this is sick. We're living with sick people.
Beasts.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've always been a guy saying, I even had a pack once, Seed No Ground, thinking there really was a point in the future where there could be a peaceful rapprochement and we'd have wings of the party, but generally a consensus in the middle about America's greatness. And although we disagree on some level,
generally a consensus in the middle. I want you to appreciate how the very idea of a left, a middle, and a right, even though I employ those categories myself, is part of this whole problem. It's assuming that we're all somewhere near the middle and we just have to navigate that middle in the right direction. But we all start from a same general neutrality and we have the same intentions. We're trying to get to the same place. We're not trying to get to the same place. Some of us are trying to get to heaven. Others are trying to turn earth into hell. And in a moment, you're going to see a gentleman, or rather, a beast, a professor from Harvard, say that belief in heaven and hell is the real problem here.
Taxation and things like that. We'd all agree that the country's interests come first. I'm done with that. I'm very sorry.
I'm done with that.
I'm done with that. That was naive. Because I'm telling you,
Dan's having a moment.
the axiomatic truth here. And the reason I'm so angry at liberals, which seems counter to what I'm going to tell you, but it's true. The reason I feel this way about liberals is because we tried to argue with liberals on ideas. We've tried desperately on this show. Argue about the Laffer curve, tax rates, the information and the data about government-run healthcare versus individually controlled healthcare, the data on school choice. They're not interested.
Let me just say, as they say, don't get it twisted. Dan, you can listen to Dan and think this is, some guy from Queens. You can look at it, right? And he's a former New York City police officer turned Secret Service. This is an intellectual dude. This man is sharp as a tack. All right? He's sharp as a tack, but he comes from this school of thought, which is kind of the base. It's kind of where everyone starts out, that thinks, well, we just all got to get together and compare notes and data. And since we all have generally good intentions, the data will take us where we're trying to go, and we'll all get there together. Join the dialogue. No. You don't dialogue with beasts. You protect yourself from them because they're wild and they're rapacious and they're vicious and they're bloodthirsty. You protect you and yours from them. You put a fence up to keep the foxes out. So you might need to put up in your mind some intellectual fencing and start appreciating what phenomenon in this world and in the society around you and in your own life falls on which side of that fence. All right?
They just hate you to the point where they will bankrupt you and tell you to die in order to win an argument.
You see?
We think liberals are people with bad ideas. They think we are bad people with ideas.
The irony being that they have no objective understanding or analytical elucidation of what the concept of badness could even mean. So they cannot even employ that category to make the implicit argument that he says they're making. More on that in another show. Actually, we've done that before. All right. All right.
That's it.
That's it.
Cover of the New York Post today.
All right. So that's what I wanted to play for you from Dan Bongino. It's an excellent podcast, better than my podcast. If you're gonna listen to it, if you're gonna listen to a podcast, listen to Dan Bongino's podcast, not mine. But if you got time, listen to both. So I'm on the couch, 3 a.m., trying to take care of me and mine, trying to learn some computer programming, and I make the mistake because, I have still got this gear in me. I was telling my, I almost said my wife, I was telling my ex the other day, I've been running at 5, 6, 7 a.m. whenever I get tired of drinking coffee and studying Java in the morning. Been running. Now that it's warm out again, and now that I'm temporarily not homeless again, been running, and I just running and running. I used to not be a runner, and the more I run, the more I'm turning into a runner. And one of the interesting things about becoming a runner, this is kind of a rabbit trail, I apologize, is that if you keep running, you get gears. You get gears, man. I noticed this on, I used to just, I was topping out at 3 miles last summer. I was like, man, I was dying at 3 miles. The other day I ran 13 miles. That nonstop. I know some of you are like marathoners. That's not impressive. To me, I never thought in my life I would run 13 miles. You get gears where you're like trucking and you're like, okay, I know I'm going to burst here. So I'm going to drop it down. Drop it down to second for a bit. Just get geared, and then you're feeling song comes on, or pastor's preaching, or him. You're just like, or you're thinking about something, or you're praying while you're running. Just like you get, I'm gonna shift into fifth here. You get gears. Well, I still got this gear in me that wants to engage this stuff despite the fact that I got material concerns in my life and familial concerns in my life that dictate that I do something else with my time and make some money before I die. You heard a little bit about that in the previous show. My son. I still got this gear in me that's engaged by this stuff, so I flipped open my phone. Mistake, when you're trying to study programming, don't, turn it off. Turn the Wi-Fi off. Unless you're using Maven, then you gotta have the Wi-Fi on. And I saw this article in Breitbart. Harvard professor Steven Pinker, who I think I've elsewhere called Steven Pinko. Well, let's just read it. Because I said in From Darwin to Donald Trump, which is episodes 1 through 10 of this podcast, this man's a beast. All right? They posture as intellectuals. He's a beast. Okay? Let me pull this up real fast here. Got a little bit of lag on the computer. I apologize. In addition to needing a pillow and a bed, I'm probably going to have to get a new laptop here at some point. Throw the logo up there for you. Be all cool. Again, I know most of you are probably listening on audio, but there is video here. I'll put it on YouTube eventually. When I get a job, I'll put this on YouTube. Sorry about the lag. Harvard professor blames Christianity's malignant belief in an afterlife for the lockdown protests. Now, I want you to just take everything you just heard, which is really just a fraction of this whole ordeal. But what you just realized or re-realized or appreciated or in the segment that we just listened to, that it's not clear that any of this was beneficial. Furthermore, there are people who want it to go on despite the evidence that it's not. And we understand why they do. And one of the big stories in the sort of cultural aspect of all this is all these people going, wow, it's really interesting how the beliefs on this lockdown, this quarantine, really seem to fall along political lines. It's like all the liberals want it to keep going and all the conservatives, for the most part, just to paint with a broad brush, don't. It's like, yeah, you think? Because implicitly, many of us either have understood or are starting to understand. Sorry, I do a little bit of I told you so. I am what I am, Sorry. People are starting to realize this falls along political lines. Why do you think that is? Well, if you go back past 30 minutes or so, I explained it. It's because this is a means. It's not about the pandemic. It's not about the response to it. It's not about the data. If it were about the data, see, we're not all just considering evidence. Some of us have an outcome we're after, and they see this pandemic as an occasion to move the ball towards that outcome, towards a different kind of world, a different kind of society. All right? Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker said Thursday, Steven Pinker is big in the evolutionary psychology, cognitive theory, evolutionary epistemology. Those are the circles he runs in. I was gonna tack on a whole deep dive into why what he does is bullshit. this episode, I was gonna lay it out for you. I might just save that for a subsequent episode because we're at an hour here. But I do want to show you something. I mean, this is my field, okay? Philosophy of mind. That's where my graduate work was, and it's guys like this that largely caused me to sort of reassess and go, whoa, this is not an honest intellectual pursuit that's happening in the university with respect to this stuff. This is a game, and I don't want to play it, and I don't want to be subservient to these people. All right. Harvard psychology professor Steven Pinker said Thursday that the push for reopening society from lockdowns comes from Christianity's malignant delusion of belief in an afterlife. Now listen to this simplistic nonsense. Atheists who believe in this life alone are more concerned with health and safety, Professor Pinker suggested in a tweet, while Christians tend to devalue actual lives and live a riskier existence. Now listen to this. Listen to what was just said. Here, an explanation is being offered of why Christians, i.e. conservatives, i.e. the right in general, or anyone opposed to leftist ideology, are against lockdowns. It can't possibly be because of the data. I mean, there's two reasons, right? One is philosophical in nature. The government does not have the right to do this to you, right? And it just turns out that the data doesn't even support it, right? Like we just saw that NBC reporter when he tweeted that study and was like, hey, you know what? This might have not done anything. In fact, it might have exacerbated the situation. We might have more death and destruction as a result of the lockdown than we would otherwise have. The data seems to be suggesting, and everyone on the left side of the aisle pounced because they don't care about the data because they're beasts. But what does the left do? The name of the game for the left, and this is exactly what Satan did to Eve in the Garden of Eden, is to posture as if they are starting from a neutral starting point. Like all that's needed is evidence, and we'll follow it where it leads. So Pinker here psychologizes those he wants to defeat. He says they're against this because of their belief in an afterlife, which is to say that they're not against it because of data, because it's obvious that the data points in our direction, not theirs. So we're going to psychologize. We're going to explain away their belief. We're going to explain away their view by saying it comes from their belief in the afterlife. So Pinker tweets this statement that it's belief in the afterlife that explains the objection to the lockdown, to the quarantine. Now, of course, the objection to the lockdown and quarantine is really objections, plural, to the lockdown and the quarantine. It's one part data-driven, it's one part philosophical, it's one part existential, it's one part, it's right. There's all sorts of objections. There's a basket of objections, a panoply of objections, right? And they're all substantial. But they're hand-waved here by Stephen Pinko, all right, as being merely a result of belief in an afterlife. What's the connection? Well, because if you believe in an afterlife, then you don't care about health and safety. If you don't care about health and safety, that could be the only reason that you would be against the lockdowns, because the lockdowns are obvious. Remember, what's the name of the game for them? Treating their conclusions as obvious and beginning from them, and treating anyone who disagrees on the basis of evidence as irrationally motivated, denying of science, right? This is just the flip side of the neutrality coin. They posture as neutral and begin from their endpoints. So my question to you, my dear listener, is why don't you do that too? Why don't you put up the fence? They're beasts. Christians, he said, tend to devalue actual lives. Isn't this just, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through this article. I'm sorry. I got to go run 10 miles in a second here. Christian, listen to the gall. I'm going to get worked up here. So much for my Swayze lackadaisical tone. I'm going to get worked up. Christians tend to devalue actual lives, paging Planned Parenthood. Here's the quote from Steven Pinker. Belief in an afterlife is a malignant delusion. Now, this man claims to be a scientist. Oh, God. I'm going to have to do it another show. Well, we got to take this man apart a little bit. I did it a little bit. And from Darwin to Donald Trump, we're going to have to get back to that something. We're going to do some philosophy of mind here in a bit. I think I'm going to do a series. I know I've been gesturing at this. Couple episodes long, called Mind the Gap. I want you to understand some things about the world that these folks claim to be experts in that will help you to see just how beastly they are when they come to the public microphones and they talk to you like this. All right. He says, belief in an afterlife is a malignant delusion, since it devalues actual lives and discourages action that would make them longer, safer, and happier, like abortion. Right? Exhibit A, He says, what's really behind Republicans wanting a swift reopening? Evangelicals. Well, yeah, maybe. Maybe evangelicals have a better understanding of human nature and human rights and the proper role of government. And maybe evangelicals are not bent on twisting and distorting and contorting those things in the face of countervailing evidence, right? What does Steven Pinker have to say about, I don't know, that Carl guy's tweet, right? What does he have to say about that data? What does he have to say about the mortality rate we've been told all along, going back to the several episodes I've done here called Pandemics and Posturing Pundits? The mortality rate, the fatality rate of the coronavirus that's all along been said to be like, oh God, it's like 4 to 7%, when really it's like 0.1, 0.2. It's like the flu, which is weird because I'm pretty sure that's what Trump said at the very beginning of all this. Pinker says, evangelicals take it to heart when James reminds them, what is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Or when Paul writes, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. Or when Jesus asked rhetorically, can any of you by worrying add a single hour to your life? Now just listen to the absurdity of these arguments. This is like just cherry picking and proof texting scripture and saying, well, this is what really explains why evangelicals want the country reopened. Hey, I have a question. Let's go back to Steven Pinker's original claim. They're more concerned, atheists are more concerned with actual lives. It's actual lives that are being destroyed by the quarantine. It's actual lives because it's actual livelihoods, it's actual families, it's actual careers are being destroyed. It's actually infirm people with other conditions that avoided hospitals because they were scared to go there because they were, right? People with heart conditions, people with diabetes, right? Those are actual lives too. You should see the statistics about the rates of other conditions and fatalities from other conditions that have skyrocketed because of what the posturing pundits have propagated to you regarding this pandemic for the past several months. Those are actual lives. It's hard, I always say I told my little sister a while back, there was an article about homeschooling. I'm like, I'm gonna do an episode on that. She's like, yeah, I want to hear you take that apart. I always think in my mind, I'm gonna take this apart. I started reading it. It's just so preposterous. I can't even give it enough seriousness to want to take it. It's like, take it apart. This is absurd. Actual lives. There's 30 plus million people unemployed, right? Or more. Is that the number on unemployment? Is that the number, right? That leads to homelessness and death and suicide. Those are actual lives. These people are beasts. I don't even know if I have more to say about this. I kind of feel like Dan Bongino, where you're just staring at the camera like, what? Is this what it's come to? Pinker says, it should be no surprise that a person's deepest beliefs about the world influence how they measure the risks they're willing to take. I would counter that it should be no surprise that a person's deepest beliefs about the world, namely Steven Pinker's deepest belief that the world is a random, accidental conglomeration and accumulation and coincidental aggregation of tiny bits of matter that form and deform and reform randomly to no point, to no purpose. And that's what the chair I'm sitting in is. That's what you are. That's what that aborted baby is. You see? Should be no surprise that his deepest beliefs about those things influence how he's willing to treat people, namely the policies he's willing to. If you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. Should be no surprise that his deepest beliefs about those things, that we are all just molecules to be corralled in the most efficient way possible. And if that means some people got to suffer, then some people got to suffer. Because ultimately it's to no point. And death is the end. And therefore, there's no real good, right or wrong, except that which propagates survival for some of us. It's not survival in general. See, it's survival for some of us, right? Shouldn't it be any surprise, Stephen, that your deepest beliefs about those things dictate how you see the data, and therefore the data does not move you, and therefore you come up with bullshit straw man arguments about some statement that Paul or James or Christ made in the New Testament as explaining why people want their jobs and their lives and their families back, why they want to live. They just want to live. It's been really interesting throughout this thing to see how it's brought the truth out about what people are actually after, about what they actually want, how they actually want the world to be. I think I'm done. I got to go run. See you in episode 47. I tried to do the cool little outro there and I failed because it was muted. See you next time. It's 49's Hemlock Podcast. Sorry to cut it short there, but it's like I just get so worked up and I gotta go run it off.
There's a war going on outside. Don't